Our heroes have realized their perilous fate. They must journey across the face of the world to find the treasure hidden long ago on an island that cannot be found by mortal means. But how to get there? How to find the place that no map has ever charted? And how do you, as a storyteller, create that suspense? Because the heroes eventually band together a crew and find an ancient sage inscribed with swirling tattoos across his body, one of which shows you in ancient lore and metaphorical language the exact location of precisely what they need. All they need to do is uncover the meaning behind this tattoo and the person who wears it. Hello adventurers, and welcome back to the Red Quills. And guess what? It's my birthday today. So I am going to, for my birthday celebration, enjoy a more metaphorical map topic today. Welcome to day 28 of the Red Quills Mapvember Challenge. Now, we've made all kinds of maps over the course of this month. We've made trade maps and monster maps. We've made maps of trading posts and castles and arenas. We've explored metaphorical maps and prophecy maps and future maps. We've done globe maps and realm maps and individual island maps. We've talked about hags, we've talked about Tarasques, we've talked about death knights. We have made 27 maps so far, and honestly, I've loved it. So what we're going to do today is something that's a little bit more left field, a little bit more out of the box than the maps that we've done already. And I have already been trying to challenge myself to keep this challenge interesting, not just for me, but for everyone else who is doing it. So today I want to do what I consider to be the most interesting challenge of all, which is I want to design some fantasy tattoos that aren't just for looking good, that actually move the plot forward. What I'm going to do in order to start this is I'm going to select our tools. Obviously, I do not have a tattoo gun, but I have a fair understanding of the prerequisites and the limitations of that media. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to select a series of Fineliner pens. In this particular case, I'm going to be using some watercolor paper because there's very little bleed with these pens on this paper and I quite like it. But you can design them with whatever you've got at home, and I would indeed, for this challenge, actually recommend a digital media. I do things by hand because I like doing things by hand because they make for more interesting videos to watch. But for a more exact tattoo of a style that will require painstaking work over several hours, if you're not confident with your hand-eye coordination, your ability to do a tattoo like that, then I would recommend a digital program. You also have to take into account that tattoos have limitations on how long they last, how close together you can add details, and how much they tend to bleed over time. So we want designs that will take into account the sort of the life cycle of a tattoo, being good at the beginning and being good at the end. And in order to do that, I went through a bunch of tattoo designs, not just of modern tattoos and the modern styles that people like to get, like the line art and the traditional American ones, but more ancient styles as well, from the swirling tribal tattoos that you would get in ancient Europe or ancient North America, to the more Polynesian style tattoos, to Saxon tattoos, to Roman or Celtic tattoos, to ancient Chinese or Arabic tattoos, and looked at the different media they use, the different inks, the different colors, and how we could kind of put something together. And what I landed on was this: I'm going to avoid doing tattoos and designs of tattoos that look like anything else that you can find on the internet. What I want to do is create a tattoo that is a plot hook and something that's visually dynamic, but not something that's, derivative. So I'm going to avoid using any colors. I'm only going to work in black and white, and I'm going to work in symbols and symbolic shapes rather than in, direct designs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 7 designs that I made for this challenge, to 8 technically, and then we're going to talk about each of them as we go on, and then you can design your own for your own worlds, or even for your own, players or DMs, if that's kind of what you're into. So we're going to start not necessarily in the order that I drew them, because I'm getting towards the end of this challenge and I'm a little bit spacey because of that. Also, it's my birthday, so be nice. By the way, if you like this video, if you like what I do, if you like the other videos in this series, if you want to help this channel reach new people, or if you want to just give me birthday wishes, like, comment, subscribe, hit that hype button, which they've added over the last couple of months and help this channel reach more and more people, because that would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that. So starting a little bit out of order, let's go with the most traditional kind of map. And in order to do that, we want to go with this panel map. A 2-panel map which consists of a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere of the world. In this particular case, I have of course done Requiem. All of the tattoos that I'm doing today are specific to the world of Requiem for the Mapvember challenge. And so while the map is, in terms of composition, fairly, pedestrian, it's exactly what the map normally looks like, I do want to talk a little bit about the composition. We've got a thicker line on the outside, which is done with the 1mm Fineliner. We've got the outline of the continents, which is done on the 0.2, and then the interior uses the single slant line shading, which is found in a lot of the older tattoos, more traditional tattoos as well, because over time, as the tattoo fades, these continents will become a more and more uniform shade of gray, which is great, which is what we want. We still want the exterior line to be the darkest color, but the shading on the continents will become more uniform as we go through, and that's great as well. We've always got to think about how they look at the beginning and at the end of the process. Otherwise, using this kind of 2-circle method gives us, one of many different interpretations of the world's surface, and it does give us a fair amount of distortion over time. It's not quite as accurate, but it will kind of give us an understanding of the world, and it is something that you could stick on a sailor, especially if you add in a symbol pointing towards, a magical artifact or a lost island or, a ley line or whatever plot point you want. That could be the version of the map that you are using. It's still very much usable as a map of the world. So that's kind of starting with the most pedestrian one. As we go through the list, we'll move into more and more metaphorical. So let's then go on to a more distance-based symbolic map. Now, long ago on this channel, I made a video on how to create coded maps, and this was before this Mapvember challenge where I made more coded maps. This one was on how you could make a map that didn't look like a map but was still usable as a map. So you could give it to your players and they'd be like, whoa, what's this? What's going on? I don't understand it. And they would have to figure out what the map means, based on the information that it contains. And we're going to take the principles of that, which is, this is actually a map of the bay known as the Sea of Anak in Anakos, which is my realm in Requiem. And it shows us the locations and the distances and the bearings from the central point of the sea using the topography of the Isles of Anak or the Isles of Ustan as reference guides to show us how we can get from point A to point B, as well as the locations of more minor towns. So what that means is you could very easily tattoo this on a sailor, because if they lose a map, if they're lost in a storm, if someone gets stranded and they know the bearing from one town and they can see the center of the sea where the islands are, they can get a generalized but fairly accurate bearing onto any of the other city-states in the isle as well. It's a reference point that they can use like any kind of public transport system to give them a bearing to sail from one point to another onto. And that's all you really need as a sailor. So in order to do that, again, you can see that I've used the thicker lines to draw attention to particular points and thinner lines to show more detail. Now, in this particular one, because I've shown the crests of the city-states, it will fade a little bit more over time as we go, and so this one really depends on the size of it. I kind of figured this as a large back tattoo, so we've got a lot of scale to work with here, and I've kept it fairly bare of details because of that. We're going to have this as a large back tattoo. We've got the shading on the outside, that sort of line work that gives us an understanding. You can see on the interior where I've shown these sort of mound shapes, those are the outline of what the islands, the silhouettes of the islands will look like from the exterior. So you could use those as reference points. If you're anywhere around the bay, you can look to the center, you can get an understanding of what the island's shapes look like and get an understanding of where you are standing based on that. All right, let's move on from that back tattoo to something that's a little bit more smaller, a little bit more compact, and a lot more metaphorical. So this one, the inspiration that I got for this one is from the Inuit stick maps, Or there's the stick maps of Greenland that we might have seen going around the internet not long ago. And it was mentioned to me several times to make a video on them and talk about them. But it's also something that I'm aware that people won't want to really make for a TTRPG fantasy campaign because you're not actually navigating for a campaign. The maps that we use there aren't for navigation, they're for visualization. But this is based on the concepts that we're using there. So the sticks used, grooves and indents to show the shape of the coastline. Rather than a simple top-down image, it was a marker for the points of interest, the sites, the locations that you go on the way from point A to point B. And so that's what we kind of wanted here. I've got a large curved indent and I'm using the shape of it to show a coastline. And what I want to do is I want to have it so it's turned so it doesn't look like, it looks like a night sky or a silhouette or something. But what this is a map of the broken shores. What it kind of looks like is the silhouette of, the landscape and the night sky above with different stars. And I wanted to do that. But if you turn it on its side and you overlay a map of the broken shores, you can see that what appears to be stars are actually the islands and the coastline is actually that silhouette. And it does show the locations of the various rivers as well. And this is the only one that I've used color on. I've used little round symbols to denote the locations of the pirate court. So this is a tattoo that you would probably find on the shoulders or the back of a pirate, and it shows for him, he's the bosun or the second mate, and it shows the location of the pirate court if they need to find it again. It's never marked on anything, on paper, but if anyone wants to find their locations, if they've been initiated and they're trustworthy, they can reference the location based on the tattoo on someone trustworthy. No one's allowed to make scans of it or make copies of that. That's just a metaphorical way of showing that. You can see that because of the use of the circles and the thickness of the lines and the hatch work, as it blends, it will become more uniform, but the general shape of the landscape will remain roughly the same. And honestly, because it'll start to blur, it will only become more accurate to what the islands look like over time, because those circles are only symbolic of their positions and their sizes. So that's the third one. That's that metaphorical coastline one. That's very much suited to a sailor, just as the second one was. And now we're kind of heading again into symbolic ones. So let's head on to one that is more of a journey. Point A to point B is what we referenced before when we were talking about a coastline map. This one is specific to a quest. This is a set of warnings of what is to come. And this kind of thing, again, I'm just showing you a version of it that I think would be cool in the style, but you can add much more in-depth ones. We've talked about prophecies in previous videos. This is similar to that. So when we did the video of the Moor and of, the lair of Ogadun, we talked about how you would enter into the mouth of the dead god, and you would go down its gullet and you would encounter, psychic traps and acid, and then finally the gestating Tarask in the chest cavity of the dead god. And so what I wanted to do was make a tattoo that referenced that. We know what it is. We know what the quest is. We talked about it before, and it's very easy when you put it into words, but that kind of observation isn't something that you just want to hand to your players, but you could give them something that looks a little bit like this. The open mouth, the skull, is the actual landscape. It's not metaphorical. That is telling you the location of what you're doing. And then this line that we're working with the hatch work and the metaphorical symbols there in that kind of bold, angular style show us what you will encounter one after the other. First, the psychic pressure, then the acid, and then the sleeping Tarask. And again, I'm on a limited time period because, again, I've got birthday things to do. But you could make this as complicated as you want in order to fulfill the requirements of your quest. So this is a really good metaphorical version if you're talking about a journey from one point to another. Speaking about a journey from one point to another, I do want to reference this fifth one as being a different kind of map, and one which I quite like as a kind of concept. 2 videos ago, we did the Ruined World, and I talked about how maps can show not just 3 dimensions, but 4 dimensions, show the changes over time as well as the distances over space. And I really want to kind of go in the opposite direction now, because a map only needs to show 3 dimensions when it's an open world. But for the purposes of quests, for the purposes of, one-shot campaigns, you don't need to show the extremities. You just need to show point A to point B and what's in between. And so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to design a map that is so much more metaphorical, so pared back, that people won't think of it as being a map at first, but will show you a journey. So this is a reference to the map of the Road of Ash that we did, which is a caravan route across the desolation, which is poisonous. But the people who take the road fairly regularly will need to know what's coming up and will need to be warned about it. So what I thought would be really interesting is if the people who worked for years on the road all get this tattoo, not for themselves, but in case their bodies are found, to help travelers find their way back to a marker that they can use to get out of the road. So because it's a line, we're going to start with a line. We're going to start with the start point, which is the city of Verdun, and then we're going to go to the mountains near the Matmut on the far side. Those are the points that we want to connect. And so along the way, we've actually got 4 points. We've got the God's Wound trading post, we've got the Spine, Impactoros, and Ashfall, and each of those have their own kind of defenses and what a person should expect if they're going to spend the night there in terms of what its defenses look like. But more importantly, what we want to do along the course of the line is show in the same kind of vein as the tattoo that we did, in the same kind of vein as the tattoo that we did at the Broken Shores, where you're not marking down distances, you're marking down the next observation that you should be making to know that you're on the right course, is we want to show what you will see to either side of the path as you're heading through. So for instance, between the God's Wound trading post and the next stop point, which is the Spine, you will have the river on the northern side, and the river has 3 bends between one point and another on that stretch of the road. So as long as you keep an eye on the river and you see one bend and then the second and then the third, then you know you're reaching your destination. If you only passed 1, you're less than halfway. If you passed 2, you've only got 1 more to go. So that kind of thinking about what you're going to be passing, about the points of interest and the locations that you will be seeing as you go through, it's less about distance and more about knowing where you are in relation to everything else. We're moving on. We're almost finished now. We've got 2 more to go. And so I wanted to come back to a perspective map. So a perspective map is a map that's done from the ground looking out. So it's less about looking down on the map, which is a more traditional view like we've done in earlier maps, and more about if you're standing on the ground looking out from a specific location, what will you see? Because again, we want to appeal to someone who is lost and looking for another point. And the way that they will look for that other point isn't from up there, it is from where they are standing currently. So that's what we're going to be working on for this map. And so what we're going to do, like any good perspective map, is we will show the outline of what they will see in terms of the mountains and the hills. We're going to show the topography from the ground and whether or not there's any sea. And then we're going to highlight specific points so that they can triangulate their position. Now this one's really metaphorical, and it's going to reference a lot of things that we've already talked about, like the different ruins and the different cities and the different states and mountains that we've already talked about. But all we really need to kind of do is highlight what they are for the person who is looking at the map and connect them to more information they will understand. So for instance, this circular symbol at the top matches the rune circle in the center of the ruin of Tanaloon. Down the bottom is a drop of blood. You can use color for that if you want to. I just didn't. We've got symbols that reference gardens or crystals or giant runes or dragons, and that will show you where, relatively speaking, everything is in the given world. The style that I've used, again, is quite specific in certain places, so you're going to be looking at making this tattoo quite large, but this is the kind of thing that you can give to your players that looks really interesting and symbolic, but they won't necessarily be able to put it together. The purpose of it is, once you know the location of each of these individual items, all of which are referenced in the ancient map of Anakos that we made earlier in the series, you'll be able to tell that the perspective from which this map is made is where you will find the god's blood on the Isle of Selkratis. And again, we're connecting pieces of lore that I've already referenced in your own worlds. Think about how you can make a perspective map where the perspective is from the thing you want them to find. That's how we triangulate position in a map like that. That's how we really showcase a specific point. If you've got a perspective looking out and you point out different icons and locations of things that they will already know the locations of, then they will be able to use that to reverse engineer the location of the perspective. That's what we kind of want to use that for. So the last one is quite symbolic, it's quite representative, but I wanted something that looked a little bit magical. So this is a map that is really complicated, but will show you not only a location, but a time as well. We're going to start with a compass, and then what we're going to do is we're going to show 3 celestial objects. There are 2 planets other than Requield in the star system that we have worked out, and these planets will be fairly discernible from stars in the fact that they are brighter and they move differently across the night sky. There also is 1 moon on the planet. So by using these extra planets, and if they have moons, and I've just assumed that one of them does because it makes things easier, and the phases of our own moon, we can not only highlight a location by using the orbital patterns of the planets, but also a time when they are all in alignment. Okay, I'm going to simplify this because the calculations are really intense and mathematical, and I don't really want to do them because it's my birthday. So here's the idea. This is an astronomical map. There are 3 major celestial bodies and 2 minor ones that we are mapping. They each have their own orbits, which we've represented with a circle, because again, this is a metaphorical map and not an actual map. But by pointing out where in the orbit each body is and where in the orbit that corresponds to in directions from the point of perspective that the map is set at, we can tell not only the location that the map is pointing to is from, that perspective point that we talked about earlier, but also the exact time, because they will all move independently of one another, and their location at a given time at this point will depend on where in their orbits they are. So this map shows us date and location. And by doing that, again, you don't need to do the calculations yourself. This is something that you will ideally never have to use again. So it's just something that you can create that looks cool for your world and doesn't need the astronomical calculations in order to figure it out. If you do want to figure it out, best of luck to you. I made this tattoo in 10 minutes. If you want to figure it out, it's going to take you hours, but I would very much applaud your work to do that. But it gives us something that looks really cool and is very symbolic. And overall, those are the 7 tattoos that I have done. And I did design an 8th tattoo. It is not for Requield. It does not fulfill the requirements of this challenge, but it is specific to my world, the one that I play my campaign in. And it is kind of what I use to kind of flesh out what media requirements I would have in creating tattoos, because it's not something that I had experience with. So I needed to kind of make something, figure it out, go to a tattoo artist and say, can you do this? And you know what? She could. So thank you for watching this episode. If you've liked this video, please like and subscribe and hype the video below. Leave a comment, wish me happy birthday, help this video reach more people. And the challenge for tomorrow is going to be pretty much the final capstone of this. We've only got 2 more days left, and my final episode will be a live stream. So please check that out, stick it in your calendars, join me for it. You can ask me questions. I'm going to sum up some of the work that I've done and reference things that I haven't been able to talk about before because I've been making these videos so quickly. So that's going to be a bit of a Q&A that we're going to finish this month off with, but tomorrow means that we have 1 more map that we need to do. I still have not made a modern map of my realm, so we're going to finish this month off with a map of your fantasy land for a DM. How can you cram in as much information as possible? What icons are you going to be using? What style are you going to be using? What media? What forms? What techniques? So tomorrow I'll be creating a map of my world in Anakos. I'll be creating a map of my lands in Anakos, and I will talk about all of the details that I am cramming into it then. But until then, happy mapping, and I will see you soon.